But we are at our last class of this series. One of the things that I learned in camp, actually, not in school, that I always loved, every time they had a learning class, the announcement that concluded the class said, learning never ends. So even though you were going to lunch and whatever else, you knew that you have to keep learning. So today we're finishing this class, but of course, learning never ends. And there are a lot of other opportunities to engage and study in this valley. So that's a beautiful thing. If you do appreciate JLI courses specifically, there's actually a course that's starting this week I think it's the Rebbe's advice or something like that. But if you're interested, I can share that with you. And as well, if you want to do another thing with us, we have a Havdalah and night out on February 3rd, which is this Saturday night. So just two upcoming events that I'm sharing. Our final class of this series, though, as we had mentioned, is titled Para and Normal. And this is all about the phenomenon of alternative and non-human life forms. So we're going to be in the student in the textbook on page 114. But really the questions that we're going to address today is what role do angels play in and demons as well? So we will touch that a little bit today as well. What do they play in Judaism? Do we believe in ghosts and spirits? As well, can we communicate with the deceased and loved ones? Which I think that I know that I've gotten questions about that in the past, not from necessarily people here, but it's always something that I drive on the different streets in Phoenix and you see psychic and this and that. And I'm always wondering why there aren't more cars there, but it's probably just bad marketing. And then of course, do we believe in extraterrestrial life in Judaism? And that's a question I get quite often. And I'm curious as we get to that part in the discussion of the class, what others think about it, believe in, etc. But what we're going to start off with today is really about angels. But before that, just an interesting statistic. By raise of hands, who believes here, or your personal perspective, in angels? Believe in angels? Absolutely. Absolutely. What I was reading was, I think in America, it's like 72% of all people believe in angels. So it's quite high. Canada, I think I saw was 76%, or maybe just a little bit less. There was different numbers, but it's quite up there that people believe in angels. What about demons? Less hands. I don't see any hands. No one believes in demons? It's the most fascinating stories. Like when you look at in fact, there's a fascinating tractate. Well, the tractate is Pesachim, so it's all about Passover. But there is, I think, a page or two that talk about demons and how to protect yourself. It's a quite fascinating discussion in the Talmud. Why do I remember that? Because it was fascinating. I don't remember everything else, but that's one thing I do remember. Spirits and ghosts. How about that? I'm putting my hand down for this one. This is one of the things that, or I should say, the way it's characterized in I'm going to say in the things that we read. Because I can say I believe in spirits, but not the way I would see it in the books that I read. How about that? Ghostbusters and stuff like that. All right, what about extraterrestrials? E.T. You believe in E.T.?
No, I don't not believe in it.
I got you. You're saying you're fascinated by it. Possible. They're out there. Okay, this is good. That means hopefully you'll have some good insight in this conversation. But again, the fact is I think from all the studies that we had talked about for previous conversations, like dreams, astrology, curses, and evil eye, none of them hit the 70s. I think the closest we got was Russia, right, with the evil eye. But none of them were in the 70%. So this is, I think, one of the most commonly believed ideas of supernatural entities. And so today, that's what we are going to discuss. And like I mentioned, we'll begin with angels. And actually, a lot of the meat and potatoes begins with the angels in this discussion. And the fact is they actually appear in the Torah quite often, which is part of this conversation that we'll start with in a moment. We'll kind of address some of those things. But if I asked you, or anyone here, just feel free to raise your hand and shock us. How would you describe an angel? Yeah.
I just want to know if the Kuvim were angels.
Okay, so just to translate that, and I have no clue how to say it, but on top of the ark in the tabernacle were cherubs, right? In Hebrew, it's called kruvim. So she wants to know if they were angels. I don't think anyone calls them angels, though. Angels, they were definitely spiritual entities that it says that when the Jewish people were doing kindness and getting along, they faced each other. And the phenomenon was that if we weren't, they turned away from each other. But again, who saw that? You weren't allowed in. And if you did go in, there's a lot more discussion about if you came out alive. So I don't know that they're ever called angels, but possibly we could define it as an angel. They were, by the way, that's a great, just actually to back up a second, they had wings, right? When they're described how they looked, they had wings. So if we're going to talk about how an angel looks, is that what you're raising your hand
I
for?
was gonna ask, what do you mean by an angel? Like, you
Oh,
know, I
that's a
believe
loaded
in-
question.
I believe in people who have passed away close to,
Okay.
give me signs of I'm okay or whatever kind of thing. I've had a couple of
Okay.
experiences that way, but I don't really believe.
So I'm going to back up, not to get sidetracked
Yeah,
with
yeah.
that. What we're talking about when we talk about angels, I'm not talking about like family and
Oh,
spirits,
okay.
but we talk about angels, like we talk about angels in the Torah. We're not talking about a family member, but somebody who visited, just to use Abraham as an example, and I'll go through a bunch of these examples in a minute. But one of the classic examples that we find in the Torah is Abraham has a circumcision. He's sitting outside his tent. It's a very hot day, and God sends 3 angels to visit him. This is in the Torah about his healing. They're going to tell him about having a baby. And then some of those angels are going to continue along and go to Sodom and Gomorrah to save Lot and destroy it. Right, those are the angels that we're talking about. At least I'm talking about. That's another one. We'll get to that. So I'll go through some of the things that we have in the Torah. But to begin with, I think that if we're going to kind of characterize it the way we see it in the media, the way we see it in books, you talk about some white entity, right? White being pure, maybe fuzzy. I don't know. That's not how I kind of envision them, but wings. So it's kind of their method of transportation is flying. But that's, I think if anyone has a different description, feel free to share it. That's kind of how I always see them portrayed.
I think of an angel as someone that comes totally out of the blue and helps you in a situation and then disappears.
Okay, so like a spirit, but again,
But
spiritual of
they
sorts.
look human because
Oh, okay, I like that, how you
they
say
don't
that.
they don't have wings.
Okay, so you're very practical. And it's that, right? We talk about someone who's an angel to us, how they've come out of nowhere. We don't know them. They helped us. And we
And they
still don't know them and they
disappeared.
disappeared. We don't know who to thank, right?
Exactly.
It's like you have a flat tire on the 51, someone shows up and they're gone before you can say thanks. So there's that concept too, but there's got to be a reason why we call those people angels. So we're like peeling the layers of the onion here. Yeah, you want to add
I
something?
was just gonna add to that, like, I feel like the angels are people who are the good doers and that just come into your life. I don't often think of an angel as something not human.
Okay, so I should really back up the question. And I don't know, by the way, in the surveys that they did, those are from larger, kind of like a Pew Research. I think when people say angel, I don't think that's technically what they're answering. They're thinking of like some spiritual idea, an entity, like with wings. I think that, so if you had raised your hand and you were part of the 70%, we're now at 60. We're going to talk about angels that a lot of people portray with wings. And the question, of course, is, who came up with this wing? Who came up with the idea of how an angel looks when they draw it, when they talk about it? My kids come home from school and they talk about an angel. They're not thinking of the person who just saved them from some situation. They're talking about like this. They might use wings, and the question is where that comes from. So we're going to turn, we'll jump into a text right away. Page 115. It is a text from Maimonides, who we have quoted throughout. He's usually, like I shared, I call him the skeptic. My brother calls him the realist. But he is a legal scholar and a philosopher, and so he writes a lot on these subjects, and that's why we actually have a lot of his texts in the class. So we'll begin with text number 1, and I'll start We'll start over here. We'll start with you.
On 115.
115.
So our exploration of alternative forms of life begins with angels. Angels appear often in the Torah, so what exactly are they?
She's reading the shaded box, just in case you're looking for that.
I am?
No, you're good. Keep reading. Meaning it's not the text yet.
Oh, so down on the bottom.
Yeah,
God created in his world beings that are spiritual, is that what-
correct. Yeah.
and have no material substance. These are the angels, which have no body or physical figure. They are spiritual entities. What are we to make of the prophet's description that they saw an angel of fire or with wings? These are all prophetic visions, and they serve as parables. We find such a figurative illustration in the verse, God is a consuming fire. God is not fire, and the description of him in this manner is metaphoric. Similarly, the verse states, he makes his angels like winds, using winds as a metaphor. Since they possess no body, in what manner are each of the angels distinct from each other? They are distinct in the sense that no two angels have an identical spiritual composition. They are on a chain-like continuum, one higher than the other, each sustaining that which is lower than it. They all exist by God's power and benevolence.
So the first thing that he says is angels have no physical form. So anything that we've described here as, for sure, not people, but when we talked about these white looking with wings, he says that's a metaphor. That is how people have described, or our prophets have described these angels. And the reason why they did that was because this is how they can kind of explain what they were doing. But what he does share is they have no body. They shouldn't look like something. Now, if they took the form of something like a person, that would be another conversation. But in their own, the way they are created, they are just spiritual. It's not something that you can touch. Each angel can be more refined than the next, meaning they come from different sources in holiness or spirituality. So there is no picture kind of that you can describe an angel with. But the question is, now that we know that we can't describe them, what do they do is the question. So it's not white. They don't have wings. What's their purpose? And so Maimonides says that they have a mission, but not an idea of how they look. So what is their mission? So one of the things that we'll translate, it says that angels in Hebrew are called malachim. Malachim means messengers. That is the primary function of their existence, are to be messengers, to be to be an entity that does something. It transfers a message, or it does a doing of God. And so instead of using the word angels for a moment, which angels can be people who have saved your life and things like that, I think it would be good for the image association that we change it to messengers or malachim, to use the Hebrew. So we aren't associating with all the non-Jewish sources that talk about angels and describe them as these white, wing-like creations. Yeah.
Why do we feel a need to describe them that way if they're a spiritual entity?
Yeah.
Why can we not just accept that it's a spiritual entity that does not have a physical?
No,
form?
we actually do think that. So just to repeat what Linda was saying, is like, why can't we just go with this idea that it's an entity that has no form? The thing is even to use Maimonides' quote where he says, God is a consuming fire. The point is that when we talk about an idea, we try to give a visual. And so the visual of an angel that moves, or people put wings on it, it's moving. Again, it came from other sources, but not necessarily non-Jewish sources that we describe things like that. But when we talk about a kind God, what we're saying, not that God has a right hand that gives, but we always associate the right hand, let's say, with giving. So we'll say God provided it with his right hand. Even using a gender for God, actually, in general, this is not going to be in today's discussion, but even using a gender when you look at Jewish texts, is talking about, is God a giver in the situation or a receiver in the situation? You might find different genders being used. So the Torah uses words to kind of help us put a visual to it, because it talks in the way people talk. That's kind of what's always used. So you are correct. If we could just go with spiritual entity that did something,
Did you know Aaron Scholar?
Yeah.
How he always called God she, that whenever he spoke of God, he always used the female
She.
pronoun. Yeah, it was quite profound to hear him because it was just so interesting.
So I haven't taken any of his classes, but I do know
Yeah, I mean,
him.
that
He's
was
come to
profound.
some events. But yeah, in the Torah, though, there is going to be a gender when it talks about, just to use something very not connected to spirituality. If you are an electrician, you talk about a female receptacle or a male. It's just, you got to know what's the giver, the receiver in the context of what you're doing. So the Torah uses that as well. But coming back to this, so now we know angels are messengers. They have no real image. They aren't something that we can describe how they look, but they do something. And so the question is, what do they do? And how is that going to be explained to us? And so again, we talk about them being messengers. Where are they going and where are they coming from? That's another question. Are they coming from heaven, coming down to earth? Are they coming from earth, or maybe some other highway? So we're going to jump into another text. This is, again, because this is about angels and very spiritual, a lot of these texts are going to be either Kabbalistic sources or rabbis who analyze, study, and comment on Kabbalistic sources. So we're going to jump into text number 2. This is written by the third Rebbe of the Chabad kind of dynasty, who was known for his Jewish law texts, which he's written books on, but also Kabbalistic texts. And so he talks about the function or the mission of these angels, of these malachim, of these messengers. So text number 2, Linda, you got this one.
The word for angel, malach, means emissary. The malachim serve as emissaries that transmit God's creative energy to sustain the worlds and all that they contain. Emissaries speak nothing of their own. They merely convey the message their principal has given them. Similarly, the malachim are merely conduits to transmit the flow from its source to the recipients. There are also malachim who serve as emissaries on behalf of the Jewish people, collecting their good deeds and spiritual inspiration and bringing them before God. Regarding the angels that receive the prayers, the Zohar teaches that they are needed because it is impossible for physical sounds and words to ascend to heaven and become subsumed in the divine source without them first being refined by the angels. The Malachim aren't independent beings. They are merely tools of the divine light that is within them.
So that's a lot, right? So number 1 that he says is their messengers are basically to transfer messages, let's say from the heavens, this idea of a spiritual message to a physical world. And obviously the highway is the human God highway, right? This idea you took a message from God coming to us human beings, to this world. So if I can use a better word, they're translators. They take this idea or blessing or divine inspiration from heaven, from a heavenly source, and they translate it to a language, to a way that we can receive it. But at the same time, they are entirely spiritual. And basically they serve this function. They serve, one function is that they're bringing down the heavens to earth, and it manifests in a material way. So if God wants to give a blessing that is spiritual, it has to translate to our world. It has to be something that we can actually receive and relate to. And so that's number 1. The second thing that he says is that they actually do the reverse. They take our thoughts, our prayers, our feelings, our mitzvot, and allow those to ascend to the heavens. Because again, we're dealing on a different plane, heaven and earth. So the earth has to have some sort of a highway that it can come from a physical material item and become a spiritual concept in the heavens. So this highway is up and down. And again, I'm using up and down, could be right and left, down and up, who knows, right? That there's no place like that. But the idea is that they serve both of these functions. On the one hand, they're bringing messages down here, blessings and everything else. Now, on the other hand, they're taking our mitzvot, our positive actions, our feelings, and our prayers, and leading them back to God. So the question is, why is this necessary? Why can't we just have a direct connection? Why do we need these angels? And so I think a good explanation of this is, if you have a warm feeling towards somebody else, they cannot read your heart. They can't read your thoughts. You have to do an action that they know that you care about them, whether that's a hug, whether that's using your voice to say, I care about you, or I feel bad for you. There has to be an avenue or a medium, if I can use that word, an intermediary that will provide the idea or the knowledge of your internal feeling. And this is exactly what's going on with God. God has divine emotions. How are we supposed to know what God is feeling? Good, bad, blessings. Those are in God's heart. They're not revealed to us. And so the angels, these malachim, these messengers, play that role of being the entity, the avenue that transfers that feeling that we now either feel it, see it, know about it. So if you think about it, they're taking something very spiritual, very refined, and they're making it more coarse. And the flip side is when we do something that is very coarse, because it's material, it's in this physical world, they are refining it. So they're performing two mechanisms, but really it's one thing. The only thing that I think is important to remember is they do not change anything. They're like the computer. You sit in front of a computer, you press the letter B and it comes up on the screen. All that software and programming behind it did not do anything. It just was programmed that when you click this button or you move that mouse, it responds accordingly. So the angels have no independence. They're doing exactly what they're programmed to do. They cannot change that, right? If they could, we're going to start talking about demons for a minute, right? That's how people envision demons, not how Judaism does, but yes.
So I just got an image of an angel, a winged character, delivering a message of love to someone, and there's Cupid.
Well, so, okay, I hear you. We're almost at Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
The idea obviously comes from somewhere, right? Anything that you find in text today, ideas like the Cupid, are going to come from somewhere. And so I always say the Jewish text came first, right? So it's kind of been shifted and changed, but somewhere at its source. And that's why I was saying, like, we know that our idea is no wings. But who came up with the idea that angels have wings? There's going to be a source set. So one of them is, like Yona had mentioned, look at the tabernacle. You look at the ark in the tabernacle. On top of it were these two angelic, I'm going to use that word instead of saying angels, angelic looking children with wings. That's how they're described. So these images definitely come from somewhere. But here is the fascinating thing. The idea that that they do not have any choice, right? They are doing exactly what they are programmed to do is actually found in another name that we found that we see in Jewish texts for malachim. They are also known as chayot, which translates to animals. And the idea being is that human beings are the only creation that God has created that have what we call free choice. Free choice meaning that you can blame instincts and you can blame a lot of things. And it's true that the way we are as human beings is definitely affected by how we were raised, the society around us, the family genealogy that has kind of brought us to this moment. But at the same time, Judaism always says you can change that. You can go beyond whatever has been imposed upon you. We have that strength. We have that choice. Animals do not. Animals are instinctive. Yes, we can put two things in front of an animal. They're going to choose one over the other. We can call that choice, but it is not the same type of choice as human beings. So their nature is very set. Animals' nature is very set. They're instinctive. And so angels are the very same. By the way, just to give you a visual for that, because when you want to explain that, you're like, what does that mean that animals don't have choice? We see choice all the time. There is a story. I don't know if this is Maimonides, but I've always heard it was with Maimonides. There was a debate in the king's court that someone said, I can change cats. I can change the very nature of the cat's watch. He trains these cats to become waiters in the king's palace. They walk on two legs. They carry trays. Again, it's a visual. And I don't know if it's Maimonides, but the story is out there as a true story, maybe not as waiters, but they were doing a function that is not animal-like. And so the rabbi, whoever the king's rabbi was or king's advisor that was rabbi, said, it's not true. And I can prove it that it is not true. So one day The cats are doing their thing in the palace. The rabbi comes with a little box, if you've heard this story. And if you know the source, feel free to share it later. And they're doing their thing, and he opens up the box, and out jumps a mouse. All right. And the mice and cats, they go back to exactly how they were programmed. The cats start chasing the mouse and forgot about all their training. So what I say is, again, animals are definitely, we can see choices, right? You put two things in front of them, that's choice, but that's not the same type of choice that we're talking about. Animals have their nature that is very set. They're going to do their thing. Within that nature, they will make choices, of course, but it will be programmed according to how the animal is. So if you know that an animal typically doesn't eat humans and they take a bite out of a human being, we start wondering what changed. Right? I think this is something that's very common. Coyotes typically do not attack human beings, but in Arizona, there were 4 coyote attacks, I think, in the last 3 months. And so that was the conversation in the news, like what changed? Because it's not their instinctive nature. If a lion attacked a human being, that's another conversation, because their nature is to, I guess, eat anything. I don't know. But yes, you want to add something?
I have 2 questions.
Sure.
Number 1, do angels function one-on-one with the human being, or can one angel function with a mass of individuals?
Okay.
That's my first
question. So the way I would answer that is only because of other studies, not from texts that we're sharing today. When you talk about the story with Abraham, it says each angel had only one function at a time. So they don't do multiple missions, if you want to call it that.
Well, one mission with a bunch of people.
Well, they destroyed an entire city. One angel technically destroyed an entire city. Or one angel saved an entire family, right? Lot's family, all of them are saved. Whoever was ready to be saved was saved by one.
One question I have, and I'm not sure it's important, but it's something that sort of bothers me. The creation of angels, is there anything in the writings that talk about how the spirits were created by
Right.
God?
Okay, so that's a very good question. And nothing that we will share today, I think, touches that, but I will tell you that if you are familiar with the story of the Golem of Prague, everyone here familiar with that story? So the Golem of Prague, just to kind of do a quick recap of it, is that Prague is going through a lot of attacks on Jews. The rabbi then is the Maharal, who is Rabbi Yehuda Lowy, and he decides that we have to do something, and he is a Kabbalist. So he creates an entity, spiritual entity with like human form, but he can't make it a human being. So that's why you have a lot of stories about this golem, and that's why we use it as a way of saying you're such a golem, right? That you just don't get it. Nothing goes through here. And so what it talks about over there is it says that every entity in this world is created of 4 things: Aish, fire; Mayim, water; Ruach, which is spirit; and Afar, which is dirt. And that's what creates the human being, the 4, I'm going to say, entities of every single existence, if it is of physical nature. Here we're talking about, we said there was Ruach and Aish. Like we talked about, the entity of the angel had 2 of those sources. So I don't think it talks about how, like, birth and this and that, if that's what you're referring to. If you want, not to sidetrack, remind me at the end of this class to share a teaching I once learned in yeshiva. It's one of those teachings you don't need, but you have it and you never forget it, about evolution. Okay, that will be my reminder. You just tell me evolution, and I will tell you a couple of crazy things that I've learned. But based off of sources, like Kabbalistic sources, ideas. So remind me that, and it kind of touches that, but it's still not, we're talking about a spiritual entity. It's not like a birth. So God speaks into existence. That's what it says. The world was created through God's speech. So, but it is a good question. Yeah.
I'm still struggling with why are angels necessary? If God is omniscient and omnipotent, he doesn't need angels, or she doesn't need angels. it makes me think that for some reason we need angels and we created them.
Okay, I like that theory. By the way, the next text touches your first half of what you just shared. Just to repeat it, the question is, if God is everything and God can do anything, then why does God need this messaging system through angels? God could create the system that works without the angels, and that's true. That's the answer to that is 100% correct. It's how God wanted the system, but will that system ever change? And the answer is yes. So in this world, the way it's set up right now, we don't see spirituality. I don't see God. I can't, that's how it was created. That's how it was created, that I don't see God. But the goal is to use one of the, it's not going to be this text, but one of the things that talks about what is the Messianic era. A lot of people are afraid of this idea because we think it's going to be changing the entire way we know life. But really, a lot of commentaries that talk about it say it's not changing the way we know life, but we will also be more aware of the spiritual component of life. Right now, we look at a table and we say it's a dead, inanimate plastic or wood, whatever you're looking at. But the fact is, for it to exist, there has to be a godly spark or godly essence to it. Right? Nothing in the world, this is the Jewish teachings. Nothing in the world exists without God's essence, without God giving it some sort of a life. Now, human beings will take maybe the meter on 100%. Tables, which are inanimate, might take the 1%. Whatever visual you need for that. But the idea is that every single thing has godliness in it. To use a story that's in the Talmud that was a fascinating story for me. This, and I'm cutting kind of to the chase. It's about a dream. So we should have shared it in the first one. This teacher in one of the rabbis in the Talmud is about to teach a lesson, and he finishes a lesson. He says, tomorrow we're going to study the teachings of Menashe, who was a very infamous king in Jewish history. He was a terrible king in the sense of leading Jewish people to sin. And so in his conversation, he says tomorrow, he finished the class, see you tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to learn one of his teachings, but he doesn't give him a title of rabbi. He doesn't deserve it. That's kind of how he's thinking. That night he has a dream. The king, Menashe, who is dead, comes to him in a dream and says, you disrespected me. I'm paraphrasing. You disrespect me. He says, in the conversation, he says, to prove that he disrespected him, he says, do you know where to cut the bread? So the rabbi says no. I'll share in a minute what that refers to. So he says that had settled the debate. Now he knows, this rabbi says, you're right. You're much greater than me. If that's the case, how could you worship idols? You're such a great man. How did you worship idols? So he said, if you would have lived in my times, you would have chased after me, trying to grab the coattails of my shirt to be there with me worshiping idols. That's the end of the conversation. The next morning he goes to class and he tells his students, today we're going to study the teachings of Rabbi Menashe, the king. So what did you hear any details that changed his mind? Cutting the bread was all it was about. What he was sharing is if bread has the essence of the bread has to be God, right? That gives it its life and that gives us sustenance by eating the bread. There has to be like a godly part to every food. Do you know where to make the blessing? If you knew where that essence was, where the core of it was, that's for sure where you would eat first. That's where you would make your blessing. The rabbi said, I have no clue. Me too, by the way, just put that out there. I don't know where, none of us do, right? Because we don't perceive holiness and spirituality and God. However, the king, Rabbi Menashe, I'm going to use the title, he was a terrible guy. He had that awareness. Now, why did it change? Just to give you the history of that. Second temple, we all lost that awareness. First temple, many of us had that awareness, which is also why we worshiped idols, because stones had a godly aspect to it. The stone exists because of God within it. So people were led astray. But not to sidetrack, that was a good digression to bring it back. This is how God created it, that the system works, that for us people who live in a world that has a lot of things that are also not godly, things that would not be good in the sense of being a refined individual. There's a lot of challenges. People can end up in the wrong places, do the wrong things. So God didn't give us that ability to see godliness. However, the goal in Judaism, we talk about time as linear, not cyclical. right? Our goal is to move somewhere better. And constantly when we do a mitzvah, we make the world a better place. We always use that terminology. And that's the idea here. The angels do not have job security, to answer your question, right? The goal is to have them out of the picture, that we should be able to communicate without them. And so that's where we come to text number 3, and you get to read it. From the same rabbi, and it is from a different text, though, of his, different book.
In the Messianic era, the rectification of our material animalistic soul will be complete, and we will no longer need assistance in transmission from the Malachim.
So our soul, because it gets pulled in different directions, it's not a bad thing, right? This, what we call the animalistic soul. It's not a negative thing, but the fact is it's materially inspired. It wants to do things that are not necessarily holy. And so as long as we have that, it's pulling us towards a less spiritual life, a life of pleasures and worldly things. But the idea is that as we work on ourselves to be better people, we also refine our soul. And eventually we will use the gold phone, not the red phone, for those of you who get the reference. Yes, Yona.
So we had prophets, right? Maybe.
Right.
And if God wanted to give a message to the Jewish people, he sent a Navi, sent a prophet to talk to them and to make them become better people and all that. So what was exactly, how would you explain the Navi? Was he part of a malach?
No, so one of the things that we talked about, so just to repeat that question to clarify, we talk about prophets. Prophets get messages to give to the people. How they got the message might have been through an angel.
Okay.
Although it does say that the only prophet in Jewish history that communicated with God kind of directly was Moses. Everyone else, it was through visions, through dreams, kind of not face to face, if you want to call it that. Our goal, though, is to be able to do without prophets, right? Prophets were very spiritual. In fact, I don't know if any of you have heard this, but there were schools for prophets to work on yourself to become a prophet. Yeah. I don't know how much they paid, but it was just one of those things in Jewish history. There were schools for prophets, like to refine yourself, be able to have that communication. But the point is the way we are today, we need those middlemen. Right, whether it's angels,
Prophets anymore.
not in the typical sense. Correct. We would know. Let's put it that way. We would know. So again, the goal is to not need the angels for this process. Now, besides you're talking about this messenger role of the angels, though, there is another concept, and that is a role that the angels fill that we do call to our attention. Like there is something else that we look at the angel and say, they are spiritual entities. They have a very deep appreciation for God, again, in the context that they were created. And one of the things that they do, it says daily, the angels praise God. So much so that I think many of you will recognize to some degree text number 4, the actual text of it. We talk about the Kedusha in the prayers. There is a part of where everyone stands up and praises God. We're actually quoting the prayers that the angels say, the way the angels praise God. So we kind of want to be angel-like. We want to find this part within us to praise God like the angels. So we'll read text number 4, Lynn, that will be you.
We will hallow and adore you as the sweet words of the assembly of the holy angels who thrice repeat, holy unto you, as it is written by your prophet. And they call one to another and say, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory.
So we lack the ability to perceive God. We don't talk that language, right? We don't know what it means to really praise God, to really see God. So we look to the angels and we quote this Kedusha, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. We use their prayers because we're inspired by them. We want to be able to do that. We want to be able to praise God properly. So we quote their praise of God. So this is the function of the angels in the spiritual realm: conduits for prayer, conduits for blessings. But in the Jewish tradition, angels also play another role, and that is within this world. One of the most prominent appearances of angels that many of you know about is at the Shabbat table. So if you know the song Shalom Aleichem, that is all about angels. And so I'm going to quote, or we'll quote it together. The reason why we sing that song, I know a lot of us sing it, don't necessarily have the context. So here's the context straight out of the Zohar, out of Kabbalah, of being accompanied on Friday night to your Shabbat dinner by the angels. All right, so text number 5, Janet.
When we return from the synagogue, angels accompany us on each side while the divine presence hovers above us and the angels. If we enter our homes with joy and receive guests with joy, and if upon arrival, the angels and the divine presence see the candles lit, the table set, and the husband and wife both joyous, at that moment, the divine presence says, "This is mine, Israel, in which I take pride."
So for those of you who know the classic Shalom Aleichem song, if you ever wondered who was the person who composed the song to that, 1918, I just Googled this. It was an American composer and conductor, Rabbi Israel Goldfarb, a graduate of the Jewish Theological Seminary. So that's the classic Shalom Aleichem that we all sing. That's how old the song is, or the tune, I should say. And because of this honor of these angels, we sing the Shalom Aleichem, which we'll read that first stanza. Text number 6. Jeff, you can do that one.
Peace unto you, ministering angels, messengers of the Most High, of the Supreme King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He.
So here we are welcoming them and then setting them off. And it's not just Friday night that we have angels that function in this kind of physical realm of guardian angels. There are a lot of verses in the Torah that talk about angels' presence that guard us. And so here is another midrashic text that talks about this concept of guardian angels. So text number 7, Terry.
A person who does one mitzvah is given one angel. One who does 2 mitzvot is given 2 angels. One who does all the mitzvot is given many angels, as it says, he will assign his angels to you. Who are these angels? They are the ones who guard the person against harmful demonic forces.
So do we have demons? We'll talk about that. No, that's perfect. So this text teaches us that when we do a mitzvah, God assigns one of his millions or billions of angels to protect us from harm caused by other forces. Right? We're going to talk about demons a little bit later. The more mitzvot we do, the more guardians we have, the more guardian angels we get. And I always tell this, we have a couple doctors here, so I always share this story. I had wrist surgery, I think 2011, I shattered my wrist, and the nurse that came into the room before the surgery, she's like, "Are you nervous?" I said, "No, I've always been taught that every doctor has an angel that stands next to them and says, heal." Right? So you get a good doctor, the bigger the angel. That's what I told her. So I use the word, the bigger the doctor, the bigger the angel. And she, unbeknownst to me, was the wife of the doctor. The doctor is a short guy. So she asked me, "Do you mean physically big or?" Right. But the idea is that God gives doctors the power to heal, but also accompanies them with an angel of healing. So we believe in angels playing this role of the guardian angel, the different kind of messengers that are also not just in the sense of the messaging highway, but the protectors, right? A lot can go wrong in surgery. You'll take the extra blessings. and you'll find a good doctor that knows how to do a good surgery. So that's, yes. You don't like that as a doctor?
You just said God gives doctors the power to heal.
The Torah says that, by the way.
Okay, but I'm gonna say that having practiced as a doctor, I always felt that I was not the one doing the healing, that it was God working through me, that I did not have the power, so I'm just challenging.
I'm gonna go,
that.
okay, I agree. I got it. We're gonna use Linda's edition.
But really.
No, of
that
course,
was-
but I'll tell you where
because
this plays.
people Say to me, thank you for curing me.
And by the way, it's
Oh,
important.
yeah,
Your way that you're saying is probably very important for those who say, how can I go to a human being to change what God wanted for me? If God made me sick,
No, but
then who am I to change that?
we do what God tells us, and the result is up to God, not to, yeah.
Right.
but-
No, I appreciate kind of, it's a slight
Yes, it
change,
was,
but it
but
changes
you
how
see.
someone looks at. You still need a good doctor.
Yes. we do need to-
So, just to go now into, on page 122, I'll run through a bunch of the different stories in the Torah that tell us about angels, adopting physical kind of looks, appearances, protecting people from harm, though. This is exactly what we're talking about, and doing other tasks. So number one is Abraham has, we talked about Hagar, I think in the first class, but this is his second wife, right? He can't have any children. So Sarah says, marry my maidservant. Then she gets pregnant and she starts not being nice to Sarah. So the story is that she kicks him out of the house. She kicks her out of the house, I should say. She runs out of water. Who comes to save her? An angel. So Ishmael, the son who was born, we know the father of all the Arabs, which is why this is the Semites, for those of you who listen to the JNF speaker. That's why you have to say Jew hatred, not anti-Semite. One of the reasons, because they're also. So how could you be an anti-Semite if you're Arab? But again, God shows Hagar a well of water, right? So we have an angel in that story. We talked about Abraham's tent. Abraham has a circumcision. He's sitting outside and he likes to host, but God wanted him to rest. So he makes it a very hot day, but Abraham goes outside waiting. He wants guests. Who comes? It says 3 men. They ask where his wife is. Again, you can follow along. These are in the text. And they ask why she laughed when they said, we're going to have a child. She says, what do you mean I'm old? But they are the ones who provide the message that in a year from now, there will be a baby, which is Isaac. So again, these are angels. After they finish, they travel on to the next city, which is to Abraham's nephew, Lot. And that is where they'll save Lot and they'll destroy Sodom, Sodom and Gomorrah. So, which leads us into the next one, which is Lot's guests, right? They come to his house. The people of that city hate guests. You can't be kind. So they want to know, who are these guests that you have? There's a lot of commentary on that, why they want to know them, to use that term, know. But he saves Lot and his 2 daughters. Lot's wife was in the beginning of the save, but she turns around. Right, so she's the pillar of salt for those of you who have seen it. I haven't in person, just in pictures. Next story that we know is Jacob wrestles with an angel. It says, after he leaves his father-in-law's house, he forgot one item on the other side of the river. He goes back for it, and he is attacked. Who attacks him? It says it's an angel. Part of the blessing and the name Israel comes from that angel. It says you fought with an angel and you won, right? So that is another angel. That is an angel that we always attribute to someone who protects his brother, Esav or Esau. Very famous story of the talking donkey. That is, who is the donkey talking to? The person on his back, which is Bilam, the non-Jewish prophet. But why is he talking to him? Because he's like, he keeps hitting him. He says, move. Why are you stopping? He's like, what do you mean? There's an angel in front of me with a sword. So that is the talking donkey. So it didn't come from Shrek, just so you guys know. And then you have the Gideon's guardian angel. There are more stories. These are just a selection. Gideon's guardian angel. This is the Jewish people are constantly being oppressed by the nation of Midian. And an angel of God appears to Gideon and he says, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." The quote. And so he goes and tells him that he should go and save the Jewish people. He only does it with 300 people, right? He's now tasked as a messenger of God. So he feels that he has to have people who are not idolaters. He has to have people who are truly for God. So I just want to, I think it's so important to share this. Maimonides, as we mentioned, will not believe all those stories. He will believe the stories, but are they angels? Right? Because remember, Maimonides was the, I'm saying skeptic. He had a different perspective on all of this. And so Maimonides takes these biblical descriptions not at face value. And so on your own, if you'd like, after the class, there are some texts that give his explanations to that. But I also want to share something that's quite interesting. Maimonides has two works, and the work of Guide to the Perplexed is really where you find a lot of these opinions. When you talk about his halachic book, which is 14 volumes, known as the Yad HaChazaka, he doesn't really deviate in explanations like that. So but it is interesting, and it's important that we remember you can find a text from Maimonides that says an angel is not the way we just said. Which when we come to demons, we'll read a text like that, which is where we're heading to right now. So what are demons? And do demons exist? We just said the guardian angels protect us from demonic forces. Right? This is kind of the yin and the yang, the Jekyll and Hyde, the good, the bad. So we'll go right into the Mishnah. This is text number 8. We're up to you, right? All right, perfect. Page 124, text 8.
10 things were created during the twilight of Friday, the final day of creation. Some say that the destructive demonic forces were also created at this time.
Okay, so if you look at the Hebrew, by the way, the Hebrew word that is used is mazikin. And you find in a lot of texts a number of different names to these forces. One is shadim, for those of you who are familiar with that. You also find malache chavala. Malache, again, meaning messengers, angels of destruction. You find ruach ra'ah, a bad spirit. You find mazikin, which is what we just used, which is damagers, things that destroy. So here is the text, just to kind of explain what's going on here. The Mishnah talks about a number of things that were created in the same week of creation. Of those things that were created, it says, are the mouth of the earth that opened up to swallow Korach, who led the revolt against Moses in the desert and his men. That was created right before Shabbat on the first week of creation. The manna that the Jewish people ate throughout the desert, also created right before Shabbat that week. So a number of supernatural things were created right before Shabbat. And some people say even demons were created that afternoon. What I want to make sure you understand is it's not saying that others say demons were not created. Everyone agrees demons were created. Some say it was created then. Okay, so we have that. Don't look at that kind of line that some say means others don't agree that they were created. So not everyone counted them among the things created right before Shabbat. Of course, there are people who disagree that what they are, which we'll read in a moment. But you had a question, Yona, before we go to text?
What's the purpose?
Oh, that's over. You know, they say in Yiddish, baruch sich, you know, you got to have the patience. You got to wait for it. All right. So what are they? You already want to know why they're here. Well, first we have to know what are they. So we'll jump into text number 9, Jeff. All right. This is on page 125. We're talking about what is the makeup of demons.
Demons are called shadim because they reside in desolate areas, shadud like the deserts. They are primarily found in the extremities, such as in the northernmost parts of the world, but in desolate with the cold. Demons are formed from a combination of the elements of fire and air, and their form can't be sensed or grasped by any of our senses. The angels' form is intangible, and because they are so light, they can fly with the fire and wind.
So what are they? They're also semi-physical, semi-spiritual. Where are they? You can go to Antarctica, don't go to the North Pole. That's what it just said, right? They're in the north. It didn't say in the south. But they have some sort of a form. It's intangible. They have a real presence, is what he's saying, but they can't be grasped. You can't see them. He also tells us that they are in far places. You don't have to worry about them here in the United States. They're out in the boondocks. So that's his first thing, right? That is Nachmanides. This is not the Rambam Maimonides. This is Nachmanides. Not all Jewish authorities believed in demons, though. And that's where we'll come to text number 10 to talk about that. The rabbi who we are quoting, by the way, has a crater on the moon named after him. Yes, the Rabbi Levi crater. Believe it or not. So text number 10, Holly, if you'd like. You're gonna pass? Barry, you good for this one? Text 10, page 126.
Demons exist only in the realm of imagination. This is what the sages meant when they taught a demon can appear to cause harm to a person who is alone. To 2 people it appears, but it doesn't cause harm. And to 3 people, it does not appear altogether. If demons were to exist as actual beings, they would appear to group of 3 the same way that they are seen by 1 or 2 people.
So he says these are psychological. You need to see a good doctor. That's really what he's saying, right? These are what people's minds think. When you talk about you're possessed, the demons possess them. That's what he believes. Or when we read any text in the Torah, Talmud that talks about demons, it's not a real thing. It's something that has kind of taken over a person's mind. They're not real. And so regardless of which one you take, everyone is agreeing that they're not independent. They can't do things on their own. They're messengers from God as well. In fact, the Ramban, that first text that we were reading, in his continuation that he quotes, he says this point. He says there's no reason to try to do anything to be on their good side or to worship them because they have no power of their own. And we'll just read that text 11.
Weak demons. Demons have no power or strength. There is no need to engage with them because they do not have an independent ability to benefit or harm us.
So basically, you shouldn't lose any sleep over demons. That's really what it's saying. They can't do anything on their own. They're completely doing what God wants them to do. And this is truly the fundamental Jewish approach that we've talked about. Place your faith in the Torah, the mitzvah, doing the right thing, do what God wants to the best of our ability. That's what we're asked to do. Yes.
That bothers me in text 10 when it says a demon can appear and cause harm to a person who's alone.
Okay, that basically is
I don't like that idea at all.
which is why you have to go to the next text and say not to worry about it.
Yeah, I see that.
But by the way, to use the psychological note of that, think about people who are isolated, and I'm going to go back to the one where we don't believe it's an entity, right? Isolation causes you to have crazy thoughts, and if you don't have that socializing, it could lead to depression, to things that really are damaging. When you are alone, I'm just using that as a context. So we talk about angels, we talk about demons. What's their relevance to us? All right, what practical lesson can we learn from angels and demons? So if everything is under God's rule, they have no power. Why do we call them negative destructive forces? That's not them. They have no control. So because of that, this text will analyze that idea and share an idea for us. Text number 12. So Pinky, if you'd like. Izzy?
Why are demons called destructive forces? The negative spirits of demons don't have any ability to transgress God's law. The side of holiness and the side of impurity are complete opposites, good and evil. Entities on the side of holiness have two distinguishing qualities. Firstly, they completely surrender to godliness and do not perceive themselves as independent entities. Secondly, they are inherently good and kind toward others, selflessly giving from all they possess to sustain the poor and to do good to all. The underlying characteristic is putting one's own interests aside to benefit others. The cause for this is the feeling of complete surrender to God. The side of impurity has the exact opposite nature. It considers itself all important and only feels its own needs. And it doesn't have any feeling of selflessness, only of arrogance and grandeur.
So basically, it's a practical thing. Angels on their own are they have this bittul, as we use in Hebrew. They do not feel independent. They feel like their entire dependence is on God. So they're humble. They recognize and appreciate this relationship, that all their sustenance comes from God. On the other hand, the other side, and again, the negative side, they were created this way. They were created this way to feel like they are independent. And so if we talk about demons, regardless if we talk about it as a mental state, the idea is an independence from God. They don't feel that they need God. One of the classic lines that they talk about Pharaoh was, he said, the Nile is mine and I created it. They worship the Nile. So it's really just a state of mind. To be angel-like is to appreciate that your blessings come from God, that without God, you can't achieve and succeed. And if you are from the other side, the idea is a mindset where I don't need God. I'll work harder and I'll do it all. Talk about the doctor side of that. So angels and demons have no choices, but we human beings do have a choice. We have a choice of how we would like to view this relationship that we have with God. You want to ask a question?
I'm just feeling like the angels and the goodness is coming at you from outside. It's like coming at you. And the demons and the negativity is coming from within you.
But you can change that, by the way. I know what you mean. That's kind of how some of us might view define ourselves. Really, that doesn't have to be that way, right? You can say I'm good at my core. Sometimes I do incorrect things, wrong things.
But then when that little voice is in your head,
that might be the demon.
Is that the demon?
One of the commentaries does say the evil inclination is the demons. But they have no choice. They're locked into that because that's how God created them. We have the choice. And so if I choose, just to use an example, the path of an animal, I'm worse than the animal because the animal had no choice. But I chose to be that way. I freely chose to be that way. So if I choose to be an angel, to be angelic, to have that style, personality, feeling, by my choice, I'm greater than the angel. They were put that way. I chose to live with that mindset, with that connection, with that humility. And that's exactly what this last text number 13, Leslie, will bring out.
in the upper worlds, the preciousness of this world is well appreciated. The ministering angels would forego everything for one Amen. Amen.
Yehei Shemei Rabbah. I did the Hebrew. It's not Hebrew, but it's Aramaic. Continue. It's from the Kaddish.
Said by a Jew with full concentration, with total focus on all the words.
So again, why would the angels wish that they could be like us? Because whatever they do, they perceive God, we don't. But in the end of the day, and they sing God's praises. That's what we talked about. And they do it perfect. But that's how God created them. And they can't do anything other than that. We, on the other hand, if we're praising God and we've made it part of our nature, or we did it with true meaning and intent, that's not our nature. And so we have done something much greater than anything they can ever do. It's authentic, right? If my kid as a 3-year-old says a blessing over food, I've taught him that. He doesn't understand it. I'm teaching him what's the right thing, but it's not authentic. Prayer, for even a kid in yeshiva, I grew up praying. So what's you'd expect me to pray. It's not authentic. Authenticity comes through learning, understanding. And I would say, I talk about myself. I still pray because I pray. Right? It's not something that I've understood prayers. I can study it and learn and understand certain prayers, but that's how it is when you were raised that way. Someone who wasn't raised that way, when they do it, it's more authentic. That's a fact. I'm sure that you see that with many people.
Because they have that desire.
Right. They've learned it. It's meaningful.
Yeah, that's
Whereas
Mhm.
I was raised praying my son was praying before he was talking full sentences. You know what I mean? He was doing Shema at night, and there's certain things that by rote. Thank you. That's the perfect word for it. So demons and angels, to qualify this, have no independence. They just do it because that's what they were created to do. When human beings do it, it's authentic and it's meaningful. And so we have a choice. We can be like the angels, or we can be like the negative forces. You had a question? Or a statement?
What question is, well, I'm going back to the same question that I asked 10 minutes ago. So, why did God create the demons? What was the purpose? Unless he created to give the person a choice.
That's for sure what it is. So why was the Satan created? The Satan is an angel, and it does exactly what it's supposed to do. That's the answer, right? It's meant to entice us. So therefore, when I do the right thing, I had an equal choice of good or bad. So this is the conclusion kind of the angel demon part of this class, which is that basically not only do we understand a little bit more about them, they're jealous of us. So now we move on to, well, you had a question?
But you can't really speak of angels and demons as both them, because demons exist only in the realm of imagination.
That's one author, right?
But
one of the things that this class tries to tell you is don't just look at it as like, oh, everyone agrees this way. There are those that look at demons as literally in mind. And so it's part of our being. But yeah, I think that's important in general. If you took a course and they said, oh, everyone agrees this way, it's almost definitely not Jewish. We have always so many opinions. Now, of course, there are certain things everyone agrees on, but like what we're talking about in this subject, I can still live as a good Jewish individual without believing in demons, as in a spiritual entity. To believe that there is a mind that is, I'm going to say, challenging me in directions, everyone can agree with that. Even if you did believe in demons or didn't, yeah.
So then you're saying not to take everything at face value, because I find cold places the most comforting places.
Right.
And I'm really mad now that.
It doesn't say,
things are
okay,
there.
but think about cold places as far off deserted, because I don't want you to lose your cold places.
Deserted. Now I'm thinking, oh my.
But I was thinking, like, I know how many people go to Antarctica. I'm like, man, is that where they're going to meet their demons? Yes, again, you have to look at it as like that rabbi explains it this way. And so that's the context of how they explain. Don't worry about it. They're so far away. If people visit that place, they're not going to be there. That's kind of how you should look at that. Right? They don't like people. They're allergic to us. Until you start reading the stories in the Talmud, and then it's like, whoo. Just a building that is destroyed but still standing, like the ruins of a building. Don't go in there because there's demons. And I mean, you could talk about that. Yeah.
So what is the concept of, I'm going to say it in Hebrew, Malach HaMavet, the angel of death?
It is a messenger of God that is taking the soul back to God.
So what's that?
I just said it's a messenger. Don't use the word angel. Use the word messenger.
Messenger of death. So
Yeah.
what's that messenger?
A spiritual entity that's taking the soul back.
It's not the demon.
No, they're doing what God wants. I mean, demons also do what God wants. You might call it a demon because they took away a loved one, right? That's how we'll look at it. It's like so terrible.
Yeah.
So it'd be normal to have that feeling, but no, we don't look at it like they're demon-like. They're doing exactly what God wants. All right, we'll move into ghosts and spirits. right? Talking about life of the soul after death. And then, of course, can you communicate with the soul of a deceased person? So we're going to go through spirits, ghosts, disembodied souls that maybe look like they're living in a human form. So the first thing that we have to talk about is the Jewish position on the soul. What is the soul? And then we can talk about things that are connected to the soul. So the first thing to talk about is really all the way back at the beginning of creation, and that is the story of the first human being. God creates Adam. It says he blew into him a soul of life. So we'll read this in the text, number 14. Joan?
God formed the human of soil from the earth and breathed into his nostrils a soul of life, and the human being became a living being.
So the verse uses the word breathe, blew, to describe how God put this life into Adam. And again, God has no physical form. God doesn't breathe. God doesn't blow in the physical sense. So what is this idea that the verse is talking about? So because of this context, because we're using, the Torah uses the word blew, the biblical commentator, one of the biblical commentaries on that verse shares text number 15. Jody, if you'd like, 133.
God did what he had not done to any other creature with his Holy Spirit. He blew into Adam a neshama that is immortal and does not perish when the body does.
So when you blow, it's breath from within. And so because of that word that was used, this commentary explains that basically this is the soul that God put into Adam, was a part of God. That's what God was trying to share by using the word blew into. So the new body, human body that God creates with Adam, the life to it comes from a part of God. It's a spiritual thing. And that soul, that life force is in the body. And when the body and soul separate, right, when a person passes away, that is the disconnect. The physical body remains here, the soul moves on. And so the soul continues to live on after death if it's a part of God. What happens to that soul after death? That's the question. So I'm going to just share, you can look with me, page 134. I'm going to do it quickly, but you can, of course, take more time to read these. So the first thing is we say souls can go to Gan Eden. They can go to heaven. They can go to the Garden of Eden. And that is where souls delight in God's presence. True pleasure. So if your greatest pleasure is golf, whatever your greatest pleasure is, heaven is even greater. Right? However you use your mindset to understand that. The other option is you go to hell, right? Gehenna, purgatory, whatever word you want to use. But Judaism, as we always preach and teaches, that is not a destination. That is a washing machine. It's soul catharsis. For the soul to end up in heaven, sometimes it needs a little bit of a cleansing. So we never believe that a person needs the full 12 months that could be in hell. Right? We say Kaddish for 11 months to make that point. Technically, we should say Kaddish for 12 months. We don't believe anyone is so, I'm going to say evil or dirty.
Yeah, we do.
We do? Those people we keep saying Kaddish for. No, but I do know what you mean. They're correct, but we're talking about our loved ones. We do believe there are people terribly evil, which, by the way, is kind of what the next ones that I'll highlight are. We talk about reincarnation. Reincarnation is where the soul is reincarnated to continue fixing parts of the soul that it couldn't complete in its lifetime. That doesn't mean the entire person returns to earth, but a splinter of that soul will now breathe life into a new physical human being to rectify. We talk about Ibor, which is, it literally means pregnancy. This is probably a new concept for many of you. That is where a soul enters already an existing person and it's pregnant. The person has his own soul. Another soul enters because it needed some rectifying. Right? Think of the Dibbuk for a moment. Right? That's a soul in someone else's body who's an existing human being who talks and whatever else. We'll talk about that one a little bit. But again, the idea is either because it's for its own sake, like the soul needed some rectifying, so it kind of went into someone else's body to get that fix, or it might be impregnated to assist the person who is, by the way, this is like true Kabbalah, okay? All right, and then the last thing is, what about somebody who is reincarnated multiple times and it didn't do its trick? The person hasn't fixed whatever it was trying to fix. So then it says they can be reincarnated as a non-human entity, right? So when you say l'chaim on that whiskey, vodka, who knows who you're drinking? All right, but on a serious note, that was a true joke. The blessing that you make on it, this is where I am going with that. The blessing that you make on that drink or food might be what it needs to elevate that soul. That is true, right? You're not eating a person. You're talking about sparks of a soul that needs some elevation, needs some uplifting. And so these are the different post-life experiences that are possible.
Does that soul know when the fixing has been done?
So it's funny, we never know what is the original source of our soul, right? So I don't know who I'm here rectifying. I mean, so I don't think the answer is no. In heavens, clearly, okay, it's done. So if somebody could talk to the heavens and understand it, they would know, yeah, that soul has completed its rectification process. I'll use that word. So let's talk about the Dybbuk for a moment. Yeah.
I'm gonna say in Kabbalah, when the soul is rectified, it returns to God.
Correct. That's always what it is. The end goal is it'll end up in the Garden of Eden. Correct. I talked about impregnating, but I did not talk about Dybbuk, all right, which is what we'll read about in just a moment, the wandering soul. Impregnating that we talked about of a soul was good things, right? Those were helpful, either to the soul or to the person that it went into. The Dybbuk is a wild card. And the Dybbuk is something that you find very few texts on. So text number 16. Who's gonna do 16? Yona, are you doing it, or you want to do it? Text 16, 136.
Based on the soul of the weak person is unable to even enter Gehenna due to its many transgressions, and wander through the world and enter the body of a man or woman. The spirit possesses the person and causes a violent seizure. To cure the possessed person, I take hold of their arm and feel their pulse. While holding the arm, I recite a specific verse in various forms and meditate on the divine names of the different arrangements of the letter form. While doing so, I concentrate mentally on removing the spirit from the person. The spirit then talks from within the body and will respond to any questions asked of it. I then order it to leave the body. Sometimes it is necessary to blow the shofar near the affected person's ear.
Okay, so who is the author of this text? The author is Rabbi Chaim Vital, who is a 16th century Kabbalist. But again, I want to share that this idea of the Dybbuk is a fascinating concept that people have made plays, movies about, but in Kabbalistic sources, you find so few texts about it. It's very rare, and where it fits in the framework of reincarnation is not really clear because of the brevity of text. But what I do want to share, and this is how most scholars look at this, is that this is actually a psychiatric and neurological problem, not a soul problem. And really, modern medicine is what we need for treating this, and not exorcisms. So I want you to know that I don't know of a single entity that performs exorcisms other than my neighbor who is Catholic. All right, who has told me he thought I would find it fascinating, and I found it's like, that's not my thing. But again, this is not something, if you have heard anything about it, like in modern stories like I have, it's always some guy who came up with some elaborate story, recorded the exorcism because he's trying to do something, but not because it's a real thing. There was a story I remember when I was in high school that you were able to listen to the tape of the Dybbuk talking to the rabbi, and it was all a ruse. It was like a rabbi who was trying to get people to, I don't know, repent or something. But yeah.
What is this word Dybbuk?
It means to cleave, to connect to. So it's a soul that has connected and cleaved and won't leave. I wouldn't worry about it. But we are fascinated by it, which is why it's in here, yeah.
On the other hand, I just had heard that it's not because they're bad, but they're afraid, and that there's been incidents most of the time it's like with somebody you know and you're by their bedside and they're afraid to go, they attach. Or you could be walking in the hospital, they're afraid to go, they may attach to you, but I know someone that a spiritual counselor said, I think your dad's clinging to you, just tell him it's okay, you can go. And there was a real release. I mean, maybe it's just psychological. But that it was more about fear than evil.
So I'll share like from the little text that I've read, meaning I'm not going to minimize anything that you shared. From the little text that I've read, how does it enter a person? That person has to give it an opening, right? This isn't it's not a process that's supposed to be happening necessarily. It's kind of like a rebellious soul to a degree, according to how it plays out, right? It's not supposed to be here. That's why we're trying to get it out. So it had to have the opening. What was the opening? Was it a sin or something? Again, I only know this because when I was in high school, that story was like a sensational story, all false. But that's where I read a little bit. So I mean, I don't think it means typically like clinging. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of possessed you is kind of how they would describe this, which is why we say, hey, that's a psychological, neurological, something that you should look at. None of the story that you shared are about being possessed. And that's kind of how they look at this. So now we talk about, yes.
So I don't know, I don't have much training at all, but I always thought that Jewish people did not believe in reincarnation at all.
Now you know we do.
So, but
So I'll tell you why. There's a lot of things that I'll explain something. And this class is not the journey of the soul, as they say, so that could be an entire class. But a lot of Jewish people believe that we don't believe in certain things because what do you mean the Christians talk about it? So how could we believe in it? But just remember, all of their things come from us. So reincarnation, resurrection of the dead, to throw something out there, is a Jewish concept, not a Christian concept. But we now are like, wait, that can't be ours. They talk about other people with that. So reincarnation is a rectification for you. It's a good thing, right? The soul, meaning the human being in its lifetime, didn't have the opportunity to completely perform its mission. And so a splinter of the soul will come back and try to complete it. That's the idea, to keep it brief. All right, so now
someone else's body.
Well, a new body.
New body.
New body, it becomes an entire person. It's not taking over somebody else.
Oh. So
Yeah.
the person doesn't know that he's.
No, you don't know who you are a reincarnation of. You're a new person. So now a person loses a loved one, which is a very traumatic experience. And we have a relationship with our family members, our friends, and we want to connect. We don't want to lose that connection. And so a lot of people look to continue that connection. They find people, entities, seances, mediums that can connect them to the spirit of their loved one and get answers to questions they have. The Torah, though, forbids it outright. So we'll start first with text 17a, page 137. Yona.
Do not do the negative, and it's Do
not turn
to the practice of oath.
So what is Ov? So Maimonides will explain what Ov is. Text 17b, Lon, if you're up for it.
Sure. What does the oath practice entail? The oath practitioner stands and offers an incense offering of specific ingredients. He holds a wand of myrtle in his hand and waves it while whispering a certain incantation in a hushed tone. This continues until the person making the inquiry hears a voice as if another person is speaking to him and replying to his questions. It appears as if the words are coming from below the earth in a very low tone, to the extent that it cannot be perceived by the ear, but only sensed by the mind. Another Ove method entails taking the skull of a corpse, offering incense to it, and chanting incantations until one hears a voice in a very low tone emanating from his armpits. Armpits? And replying to his questions. These are all forms of Ove and are types of idol worship. We were warned against these practices in the verse, do not turn to the practice of Ove, Leviticus 19:31.
So regardless of what form let's say a medium does, the Torah says it's forbidden. Clearly forbidden. However, the question is not answered, is this real or not? It's just saying going to someone who tries to do this and does this is not allowed. But do we really believe this is happening, or is it a show? I'm gonna wait for your questions soon so we finish this part. So we're gonna turn to text 18, which is a story of King Saul. King Saul violates this law because Samuel the prophet, who had guided him all of his life, has passed away. He doesn't know what to do. So he disguises himself and he goes to an Ove practitioner. So text number 18, Terry.
Saul said to his attendants, find me a woman who is an old medium, so I may go and inquire of her. There is one in Endor, they said. Saul disguised himself, putting on other clothes, and went at night with 2 other men to the woman. Practice Ove for me, he said, and conjure up for me the one I will tell you. The woman asked, whom shall I bring up for you? Bring up Samuel, he said. When the woman saw Samuel, the king said to her, don't be afraid. What do you see? An old man wearing a robe is coming up, she said. Saul realized it was Samuel, and he bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? I am in great distress, Saul said. The Philistines are fighting against me, and God has departed from me. He no longer answers me either by prophets or by dreams. So I have called on you to tell me what to do. Samuel said, why do you consult me now that God has departed from you and become the supporter of your rival?
Which is King David.
God has done what he predicted through me. He has torn the kingdom out of your hands and given it to your fellow, to David.
So reading this text at face value, clearly it's a real practice. Mediums can indeed bring up spirits and communicate with them. And of course, it's not unanimous, right? Not everyone agrees with that, but most do say that this story is literal. But here is a commentary that kind of sheds some other light on this very story. So Bruce, would you like to do it? Text 19.
Rabbi Shmuel ben Chokni wrote that although the implication of the Talmudic discussion of the story of Saul, the old practitioner, is that the women truly conjured up Samuel, this understanding is logically untenable and can't be accepted. Rabbi Sadia Gan and Rabbi Hai Gan explained this story differently. They wrote that while it is indeed impossible for the woman to have foretold the nature and the future or conjured up Samuel through the old practice, in this case, God brought Samuel up to relate future events.
So 2 points that he brings up. Number one is it's a total sham. The lady just did such a great job. And the story is shared in the perspective of Saul, who saw or thought that this was actually happening. Number two, though, is he says this was a special miracle that happened, a one-off miracle that Saul, the king, was able to actually communicate with Samuel the prophet. Regardless, though, like I mentioned, this has actually absolutely no practical difference in Jewish law, what we believe, because in the end of the day, it is strictly forbidden to do this. But because of that, we have a question. So you can't do this. Does Judaism have any other way that we can maintain a relationship with a deceased, with a loved one? So to answer that question, we're going to talk about for a moment the soul. The soul, it says, consists of 5 components. I'll just say them in Hebrew quickly. Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, and Yechida. Those are 5 levels of the soul. But the way it pertains for our conversation, we're going to talk about 2 levels, the lowest 2 of those 5, which is Nefesh, which is the soul, which typically what we refer to is it's spiritual, but that's what gives us the physical life. And then you have Ruach. I think I'll put them on the screen, but they're in the book as well. So Nefesh is the soul that gives us life, the component of the soul that gives us life. Ruach is the part of the soul that drives our emotions, our feelings. And so when a person passes away, the soul that served a biological function, the Nefesh, the part that gave us the life, that one remains in the grave with the body. The Ruach, the one that communicated and helped us with our feelings, that goes to Gan Eden, that goes to the Garden of Eden. Now, when you read text, a lot of times Nefesh and Neshama are interchanged. So I'm just sharing, if you see Nefesh somewhere, it just means the soul in general. But when we talk about the parts of the soul, Nefesh is the lowest level. Ruach would be the next part. So again, the Nefesh enables the life that we have, the physical, biological life, that remains in the grave. Ruach is what gives us our emotions. That goes up to heaven. And so when we visit the grave of a deceased, right, we as Jews, we know we visit the grave. We come there to communicate, to pray. When we do that, what's happening? What is the effect? What are we communicating with? So the Zohar explains what happens when we visit a grave. This is text number 20. Barb, would you like to read?
Due to the fact that the names of the living are acquainted with them, the time of need, and please God for mercy. The inhabitants of the world are in need, they are in sorrow and visit the cemetery. The Nefesh is aroused to the fight. Descends and awakens the Ruach, which returns and entreats God for mercy. Consequently, God has mercy.
So the soul rises to heaven. When you come to the grave, it's a connection that the soul is always connected to us. And therefore, technically, without visiting the grave, the soul knows exactly what's going on with their loved ones, with their family. But when we come to the grave and we ask the soul to pray on our behalf and beseech heavens, it is that component of the soul connecting to the component that's in heaven, say, hey, this family member, this person needs extra prayers, extra help. So it's like a portal. At this grave, we connect to the soul. Now, in addition to the personal communication that we just talked about, that benefits the soul, this relationship, we also have other practices that we do, that what I call the Jewish memorial practices. One of those things is mitzvot. If we want to affect a connection to our loved ones, we do that through mitzvot, because that's the one thing that they are missing. When a person has passed away, they no longer can perform mitzvot. So the gifts that we, the living, can give to our loved ones are mitzvot, the one thing that they can't do anymore. And so to read this in a text, to see the impact of the mitzvah that we do, this is Rabbi Aaron of Karlin, a very famous rabbi in the 1700s. Text 21, I guess I'll read it. When children say Kaddish for their father or mother, it is like sending regards. When they learn a chapter of Mishnah on their behalf, it is like sending them a letter. And when they fulfill mitzvot and good deeds for the benefit of the soul, it is like sending them an entire package. So death does not end our relationship. We mourn, of course, and we grieve for the physical relationship that we had, but we can truly draw comfort and knowledge in the knowledge that they continue to care about us, and we continue to express our feelings towards them. The next part is about extraterrestrials, and I am going to use the screen for that.
Humans are curious. Gazing into dark skies to inspect its shiny objects has been a fact of life for as long as human life existed. But what about those planets and galaxies? Does any life exist there? Is there anything out there on any planet, anywhere, staring in our direction and dreaming? Jews love questions, and this one was presented on several occasions to Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, known simply as the Rebbe, whose knowledge of both Torah and scientific sources was truly remarkable. The Rebbe insisted that Judaism does not rule out the chance that life may exist elsewhere, and that classic Jewish sources are divided as to whether such life actually exists. But when it comes to the purpose for which God created the cosmos, planet Earth is unique. Only its human inhabitants received a Torah from God, and only they have the capacity for free choice. So, is there life on Mars? Perhaps, but there are certainly no synagogues. In the early 1960s, a leading Jewish scientist, Professor Velvel Green, worked for NASA's Planetary Quarantine Division. He asked for the Rebbe's opinion on his exobiology program that was seeking signs of life on other planets.
I said, there are those, and I used the words, there are those of your followers who say that a Jew should not be working in the space biology program, the exobiology program, because it goes contrary to Torah. The Rebbe stopped, one of those beautiful moments in time. He didn't smile, and he just thought. And then he came back with this, and he said as follows, exactly the way I'm doing now. He pointed at me, and he's saying this in Yiddish. You should look for life on Mars. You should keep looking for life on Mars. And if you don't find it, keep looking elsewhere, and keep looking. Because to sit here in this world and you say there is no life elsewhere is to put a limit around what God can do. And that nobody can do. Now the Rebbe didn't say there was life on Mars. The Rebbe just said that the job of a scientist who is trained in that profession is to keep looking for it.
But not everyone received such a response from the Rebbe. In 1978, a similar question was posed by a young Jewish man living in Milan, Italy. He and his friends had been debating the question of extraterrestrial life, and they turned to the Rebbe to inquire about the Torah's perspective. The Rebbe wrote back, but his reply was as distant from his response to Professor Green as the Earth is from Mars. He advised the questioner that although nothing in Judaism negates the possibility of extraterrestrial life, it was not advisable for him to be spending time investigating the question. Instead, he should focus on the terrestrial life surrounding him. I must admit that I answered your question without great enthusiasm. This is like a scenario in which we face a dangerously ill patient or a burning house, and instead of trying to save the patient or extinguish the fire, we deliberate profound theoretical questions about the cosmos. Such inquiries won't do a thing to help the patient or extinguish the fire. Similarly, today's Jewish youth are seeking direction. They are missing the path of Torah and its commandments, which is the path of true life. And this crisis is not happening somewhere in the heavens, amid the planets, nor in a remote corner of the earth, but rather in the immediate vicinity of you and your friends in Milan, and it is a matter of vital importance. God promises us that when we truly exert ourselves in this regard, we will succeed. Two different individuals, two very different responses. So, is there extraterrestrial life? Well, it seems that if you're a professional scientist with your head in space, advance science. Discover more of God's wonders. But if you belong to the rest of humanity, seek life on Earth. Work tirelessly to enhance it and create wonders here for others.
So again, if you'd like, you can read through some of those letters that are referenced in the pages in the text. Page 146. I'm just going to conclude with a thought because there's no more text. And you can look at this. This is the exercise that's on page 150, or I could just share it. If you can summarize one practical message that resonated with you from each of the 4 lessons in this course, we're talking about dreams, astrology, curses and the evil eye, angels, demons, and spirits. And I'm just going to jump into this, but I'll share how I look at this from from all the different texts. Is that we, of course, can believe in astrology if we'd like to. We can believe in our dreams. We can totally believe in curses and the evil eye. And these are things that are true in Judaism. And the same things with angels, demons, and spirits. But in the end of the day, the practical teaching, I think, that was most taught and emphasized was that the truth is, regardless of their validity. So if you feel like they're not true, in the end of the day, it's like that video just ended, was it's all about what we do here on this world. We don't have to worry, was the dream true or not? Should I change how I live or not? We have to just remember that our actions, I thought this was a really powerful text. Our actions down here control what goes on there, not the other way around. And so the most important thing is to live our lives with true meaning and real purpose. And that is, I think, a very generalization of the messages that we can take. Really, that's a thread that goes through each of these 4, I'm going to say, categories. I'll put on the video of the recap, and then if anyone has any questions, I'll stay behind, and I will share, for those of you who would like afterwards, the evolution thing.
Lesson 4. Para and normal. 1. Angels are spiritual entities that lack any independent authority. They process and convey our prayers to God and do the same for His flow of blessings to us. As independent beings created in the image of God with the gift of free choice, we humans have the most meaningful relationship with God. 2. Many Jewish sources accept the existence of demons, impure spiritual forces that cause harm. These forces are not autonomous and cannot do anything beyond God's system of justice. Other Jewish authorities consider demons to be a purely psychological phenomenon. 3. Angels and demons are defined by their mindset. Angels are God-centered and selfless beings, while demons are self-centered and selfish. We humans have the unique ability to choose to operate with an angelic mindset, or the reverse. 4. The human soul is eternal and continues to exist after death. The Torah forbids us from practicing any rituals aimed at direct communication with the spirits of the dead. But the souls of our deceased loved ones continue to care for us, and we can maintain a relationship with them by performing mitzvot in their honor.